superstition mountains in the heart of the Arizona desert. Welcome to the Briggs Podcast. I'm your host, Briggs B. Cunningham, and I appreciate you tuning in. It's fantastic to have you join us as we connect with listeners from around the globe. If you find this episode enjoyable and our content valuable, don't forget to subscribe and visit the About section on our YouTube channel and learn how you can support our efforts. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. In the autumn of 1612, musician, medical celebrity, and philosopher Adam Hasselmeyer faced a shocking fate. Ordered by a Jesuit inquisitor, he was arrested and sentenced to slavery in the Mediterranean galleys. Why? Why did this happen? Earlier that year, Hasselmeyer published a response to a controversial manuscript called the Fama Fraternitatis, aimed at those interested in advancing science and religion in a corrupt society. To learn more about the Rosicrucians and their unrecorded history, it is my pleasure to have Timothy Hogan with us. And you can read Timothy's extensive bio in the About section of this episode. Timothy Hogan, welcome to the Briggs Podcast. Great to have you on this first episode.
Hey, thanks for having me, Briggs. I'm really happy to be here. One of my favorite subjects.
Fantastic. Well, we're gonna be talking about, our title today is Rosicrucians. And where I would like to start is with early influences. And maybe we first start talking about, most of them, if not all of them, were physicians. They were studying, seeking medicines. They were chemists. Some say they were seeking the universal medicine, a true tincture, a stone of the wise. And maybe we can start in Egypt, Egypt, where you've been multiple times and do many tours. Back in the day, was very famous for its medical practices. People would come from everywhere there. We can look at India and China, which, we haven't really been able to get into too much. Yeah. The Greeks come into Egypt and they make this stuff now practical and accessible. The Romans play with it. We have osmosis of Panapolis, which now integrates Egyptian, Greek, and Roman traditions into early alchemical texts. And then Rome falls and we enter the Dark Ages. And thank God the Muslims of the world preserve it.
Right.
And now that brings us to a precursor context, the Knights Templar, which probably better than anybody on this planet. So my first question is, did the formation of the Knights Templar later influence secret societies through their rituals and ideas?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So one of the things that the Templars did, everyone knows that the Templars went down to Jerusalem and they were digging for artifacts and lost texts under the Temple Mount. But what most people don't know is that they went from there into Egypt and they started exploring the mysteries of Egypt. They were looking for lost technologies. They were looking for lost medicines. This is where they began to learn of alchemy heavily, coming from the word Kemet, literally the ancient name for Egypt is where alchemy comes from. It's from Kemet. But one of the things they came across while they were in Egypt is they started meeting with people within the Coptic Church that were preserving information, and certainly a different form of Christianity that they had been exposed to in Europe with the Roman Empire. But they also met with Druze and Sabaeans and others, Muslim mystics, which we would refer to today as Sufi, and they started exchanging information about doctrines with them. And they came to study the temple walls of they took over places like the Temple of Isis at Philae. They set that up as a headquarters. Dendera, the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, they set up a preceptory there. They were clearly at places like Elephantine Island and Edfu. And Edfu, by the way, is where the story of Atlantis was recorded. And you can actually, to this day, find Templar markers at all of these places, as well as Templar graffiti from, clear back in the the late 1100s. So they were exploring all this stuff. But one of the places in Egypt that made the most impact, obviously, was they were getting into the Great Pyramid. They're putting graffiti there. I mean, to this day, there's still an Alpha and Omega carved into one side of the sarcophagus in the king's chamber.
Wow, amazing.
Graffiti from them. But what they came to learn is that there's this whole area of tunnel networks between Giza and Saqqara. And by the way, Saqqara is where we get the word sacred from, and it's where the pyramid of Djoser is. But between those two areas, which is about 20-mile distance, is just full of these underground tunnel networks. And in these tunnel networks are amazing evidence of advanced technology that nobody at the time had, that we know of, and we some of which we still have trouble doing today with our modern technologies. So they came across this, and this whole area was known as Ras Tau, was the Egyptian name of it. Well, if you take that word Ras Tau, which was being passed down, through the oral tradition of these groups that were meeting within the Egyptian area. If you take this Egyptian word Ras Tau and you translate that, or you transliterate that into Latin, which the Templars would have been aware of, Ras becomes rose and Tau becomes cross. So it became the area of Rose Cross. And so this is the first place where the Templars encountered this word, and it related to this, all these mysteries that were taking place there in Egypt. So they took this idea of the Rose Cross, to alluding to these mysteries. Certainly some of the groups that were perpetuating these ideas within the Islamic world, the mystic Islam, they used the rose as a symbol already, because the word rose in Arabic is ward, and the word for meditation in Arabic is word. And so they sound so similar. They use a rose to represent meditation. So they would combine that with their Christian cross, and it became, a fusion of both the Christian world and the Islamic world, but preserving the mysteries of both. And that rose represented consciousness unfolding out of matter. So then the Templars brought this back to Europe, and they tried to start preserving some of this knowledge on the cathedrals they were building, which is why to this day, if you look at the any of the cathedrals in Notre Dame, or most cathedrals from Europe at the time, if you look at the cathedral from the air, it looks like a cross, but of course then it has these rose windows in them, which makes them rose crosses.
That's amazing.
So they're trying to preserve this knowledge to a certain degree, and which included the alchemical sciences and everything else that they were learning, and they started preserving them by carving them onto the cathedrals themselves. I mean, there's all kinds of alchemical knowledge, that was only being preserved by Islamic groups at the time, and those who were going down into Egypt and trying to find this information that was being preserved. So
it sounds like, with the formation of the Knights Templar, later definitely influenced secret societies through their rituals and ideals. Yep. Somebody saved that information that you just shared with us. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Somebody set that aside for maybe a future time. In 1307, they're arrested by King Philip IV of France, and again, their legacy to this day still influences esoteric traditions, including, would you say, Rosicrucianism?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In fact, by shortly after the arrest they had to try to survive in different parts of the world. So they went up to Scotland. Some say they, under Robert the Bruce, they helped win the Scottish War of Independence, and actually there's a degree which is still, or a knighthood that's still practiced under the Royal Order of Scotland, that's called a Rosicrucian Knight of Kilwinning, and it's said to be, a direct extension from the Templar involvement in that. But they went to other places too, like in Germany, where they eventually became, restructured themselves underground, and formed a lineage known as the Militia Crucifera Evangelica,
which we'll definitely get into. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was these early Templar underground survivals that ended up forming these new, almost like secret societies, where they were trying to preserve the mysteries. And you find that all throughout Europe. but yeah, and it was believed to be an extension of the ancient mysteries that they had picked up in Egypt through these different groups that were hanging out there.
Yeah, and these teachings that the Templars had were secret. You had to be initiated in, and the breadcrumbs between all these groups, I think, and you tell me, is their philosophy and their practices were taught in allegory, signs, symbols, and possibly mystery numbers.
Yep. And ritual. I mean, they did this. They definitely were preserving a ritual that the Templars had done and was doing in the Great Pyramid before. After their suppression, this ritual will still continue to be passed down, and in different ways, but ultimately culminating in the same signs, symbols, passwords. Hand grips was a big one too, and it was a way to be able to know who you could trust, not only with information, but with your life, literally underground.
Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. Here's a good one here. So 1403, we're told in some of the writings, even the ones that were private before published, that the Rosicrucian Order was founded by Christian Rosenkreuz after he returned to Germany from travels in the Middle East. Or, this is my thought, probably listening to some of your talks, or is this just a repository of knowledge of medicine luminaries like Giordano Bruno, Mirandola, Paracelsus, maybe even Andrea himself, and the Reformation of Luther just a century ago, wrapped up in myth?
Yep. Yeah. Well, you keep in mind, so by 1314, the Templar Order was suppressed, and so it went underground. So less than 100 years later, we're talking about early 1400s. And some people, there are myths. Manly Hall talks about one particular myth where it alluded to the Templars were trying to preserve underground Albigensian knowledge, which was also known as the Cathars, and of which the Templar Order was founded with, out of Cathar families. So shouldn't be too surprising, but there is a story that there was a particular boy of Albigensian lineage that had been preserved, who later became known as Christian Rosenkreuz, but who was secreted away to the Black Forest region, which is, of course, where Martin Luther had also been taken in when he was when he had to kind of go underground for a while after he nailed his thesis, protesting Catholic abuses. And certainly this region is exactly where later we find Johann Valentin Andrea and the Militia Crucifera Evangelica,
Okay.
of which Frederick, the Duke of Württemberg, who was the Grand Master, ended up being the great Protestant defender, during the 30 Years' War, so this is where this whole Protestant break started coming out of, was the same region.
So it looks like around 1492, we have the fall of Granada. There's the expulsion of the Jews, which I'm guessing was translating a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, that was in Spain.
And then it increased secretive religious practices, and it seems like the mystical traditions just explode out now. They're taking a lot of the documents and stuff like that. So 1530s, we've got a figure like Paracelsus, who the Rosicrucians were big fanboys of, as we know.
Yeah, that's right. He usually promoted.
So he, biggest thing I got from him was him reintroducing metals into medicine. We can thank him for our multivitamin today.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Anything on Paracelsus you want to add? Because I know he was a big part of their influence.
Yeah, I mean, he was studying alchemical doctrines that had been brought back to Europe from the Middle East, primarily, by the Templars. I mean, and you have to remember, during this time there were pockets of survival going on still too, not only in Germany, but in Portugal, where the Templars became known as the Knights of Christ. There was also in southern France, in like areas like Courdes-sur-Ciel, near Toulouse. There was pockets of survival that were happening, and out of this, they were preserving these texts and this alchemical knowledge that had been brought back, from the Middle East. And Paracelsus sought all this information out, and you started studying these texts and implementing it, specifically during the bubonic plague area, where everyone else was running away from towns.
Zinc, that was the medicine he used.
That's right.
Funny enough, with COVID, right?
That's exactly right.
And I think he even gave it that name. I think
he did.
Wow.
He did. And he was the one, and he was running into the towns that everyone was running away from and trying to cure people. And he was very. I will say, his middle name was Bombastus. Yeah, because where we get the word bombastic today, and it's because he really stood up to the medical establishment at the time. They were looking at things totally different, and they didn't understand things like basic hygiene.
Yeah.
That was the other thing.
Bacteria.
Good for. Yeah. He was the first one to say, look, if you're going to do a surgery or something, you need to disinfect your tools. And so
use some alcohol.
Did a lot with alcohol, and then also with heat and flame. And he was saying these were, you had to do this, and everyone else thought he was nuts at the time, but he was absolutely 100% correct. So.
Yeah, huge influence. We move into 1560. We've got John Dee, who's an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. He's exploring angelic communication and the mystical arts. He's laying groundwork for later esoteric movements that are later transmitted to Francis Bacon. I think we're coming to find out Bacon was Queen Elizabeth's son. I'm going to go a step further and even say maybe Dee and Queen Elizabeth had something going on.
Yeah,
I don't know. I know the dates kind of line up.
Yeah, I mean, Dee was really one of the heads of Queen Elizabeth's new Secret Service.
007.
Yeah, that's right. Where he, in fact, 007 comes from him in his writing. But he was he was definitely Francis Bacon's tutor.
Yeah.
And we know that, and Francis Bacon used to visit him at his house. And at the time, Dee had the largest library in Europe. I mean, he was,
He had carte blanche of all those.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He was trying to preserve all that knowledge, that alchemical knowledge, and everything else. And Queen Elizabeth at the time, she belonged to the Militia Crucifera Evangelica, which was that underground Templar survival group from Germany that Frederick, the Duke of Württemberg, was the Grand Master of. And so, just as Frederick was, fighting the 30 Years' War in German, the area we now call Germany, Queen Elizabeth was also setting herself up as the Protestant queen. So it was very much a part of the Protestant movement at the time, and I think that was to wrestle control out of the Roman Church, which was seen to be abusive. And even Martin Luther himself, by the way, let's back up a little bit. His personal emblem was a rose cross, which is significant. I mean, we shouldn't just
Yes.
gloss that over. So it's that the same symbol is showing up again and again, and it is being used. And by 1503, Queen Elizabeth actually had a costume ball where the one of the characters in the costume ball was known as a Rosicrucian. So this is the first time we see the word showing up, Rosicrucian showing up.
Okay, that was something I could never track down.
Yeah,
Thank you.
And
we're really building up to something here. This is amazing.
Yeah. So what's his name? The Indigo Jones, who designed all the Shakespeare costumes. Indigo Jones was also hired to design the costumes for the ball that Queen Elizabeth was putting on. And again, one of the characters of these costumes was a Rosicrucian. So here we have, what I found is the earliest reference to that term, but it's being done by Queen Elizabeth, who's a member of the Militia Crucifera Evangelica from France, or from Germany, where all the Rosicrucian manifestos ended up coming out of, and of which Johann Valentin Andrea is also a member. Johann Valentin Andrea is also friends with Francis Bacon, her son, Queen Elizabeth's son. So you can kind of see, what's festering here, in terms of where all the connections go to. Yeah.
That is amazing. And right at that time, this where we're at right now, 1590, Shakespeare hits England.
Yeah.
Right. Starts in,
right.
And starts enlightening England big
right.
time. Even their language
right.
changes. They almost receive their own Christian Rosenkreuz or Thoth or Hermes in a sense,
right.
Through mystery plays. And now I believe this is the meat of our conversation today. And you've been alluding to it many times. And I didn't know anything about it until we spoke a few weeks ago. And I want to thank you for that information, because that's what really wanted me to do this interview today with you. Is, remember, nothing's been published yet. We're not talking about even anything being published yet. So did the Knights Templar and the Rosicrucians, which didn't exist yet really as a real group, ideas emerge as one during the, I'm going to butcher this, the Synandrum Conventus held on July 27th, 1586, in Lungberg, Germany, as mentioned by Simon Studian in his work. And this is what you led me to, the Neometria. Let's talk about that.
So Neometria was really like the first manifesto.
Okay.
If we're going to call it something a Rosicrucian manifesto, I mean, it doesn't say the word Rosicrucian in it, but it does have an image of a rose cross in it. And it's which was this symbol that was being passed down by these Templar strains. And so, so there was a convention held in Nuremberg, Germany, on July 27th, 1586, that was it was this underground Templar organization, the Militia Crucifera Evangelica, and 10 years later, by 1596, there was this new document that was completed called the Neometria. Simon Studian was the one commissioned to put it together, and Neometria, by the way, just means measurement of the temple.
Okay.
What it is it's basically a 2,000 page book. It's 1,998 page book that describes the dimensions of King Solomon's temple, and it suggests that all of those dimensions allude to things that are alchemical, Gnostic, Kabbalistic, and astrological. And
that's where it comes in.
Wow. We're starting to see the formation of what was going to be known as Rosicrucian doctrine, right?
Yes.
So, and the people, some of the people that were involved in this underground group include not only people like Simon Studian, but Johann Valentin Andrea as well. Queen Elizabeth is mentioned in the document of the Neometria itself. The document is dedicated to the Militia Crucifera Evangelica. It outlines Frederick as the Grand Master, Frederick the Duke of Württemberg. It mentions Queen Elizabeth being a member, and so this is really the foundation of what is later become known as Rosicrucianism, because out of this, we then start seeing new documents, including the Fama, the Confessio, and the Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz by Johann Valentin Andrea. So over the next, I don't know, I guess be like the next 10 years, really. So it's like in these 10-year segments, you have the Neometria,
so we'll go through those. Yep. Yeah. Yep. That's amazing. This is the birth. This is it. The birth. And I don't know where I got this, but I found this somewhere. It says the Rosicrucians believe, this is pre-Fama, to usher in a new age. Effectively, one should envelop their vision in a legendary myth, shrouded in mystery, as a mystery proves one of the most compelling methods to captivate people's attention.
Yeah.
And it worked. 1612, the Fama is privately distributed. This is where we get the events surrounded by the fall guy, Adam Hasselmeyer, who's responding to it.
Yeah, and by public. The way, I think I said 1504 earlier about that thing for Queen Elizabeth's ball, but it was actually 1604.
Okay.
Which means that's when the ball was. So
that makes perfect sense.
Would have had to have started designing the costumes by probably 1603.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Adam Hasselmeyer goes out in the public. He's the public voice. 1614, the Fama is made public. It's a discovery of a brotherhood of the Worshipful Order of the Rose Cross is published, attributed to Christian Rosenkreuz, presenting the Rosicrucians as a discrete fraternity with the ideals of wisdom, healing, and societal reform. Boy, did these guys have cojones.
Yeah.
In that time period. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. What I was going to say is it says that they meet in the house of the Holy Spirit once a year to further total reformation of knowledge. What I always found interesting in this document myself, digging through it for decades, is the book M. And I'd like to run this by you and see what you think.
Yeah.
I think the book M, and I think the Fama was mainly written to get the attention of King Rudolph. I'm guessing the book M might have been the Vonage manuscript which everybody wanted. Nobody knew what it was. Nowadays, if we look at it, to me, it looks like a woman's health and hygiene plant medicine, also
Yeah,
known as alchemy. And it makes sense
exactly.
these men are looking at it, because if I have to go to the store once, during a time a month for my wife, I have to FaceTime, what box to pick. So of course they're like, what is this thing? And they're mesmerized by it. And then we get the story of Dee and Kelly finding it in Dunstan's tomb with the white and red mineral,
Right,
which was
right,
gold and silver, and they're going around using it as projective. So my
right.
guess is, and you tell me, I think this was a political move to now, get that side of Europe moving, and it seemed to work again, even through King Rudolph.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean Rudolph was the main supporter of alchemists at the time. There was that alchemist alley there in Praha, or Prague, Czech Republic, but at Prague primarily. And uh, I think what happened was Dee and Kelly, when they found these substances at Glastonbury at St. Dunstan's Abbey, they ended up. I think actually one of them might have been mana, the white
Oh,
substance,
wow.
and I
Wow.
think the red substance was what Paracelsus referred to as the red lion, and it it was made of gold. It was one of the main ingredients in it, but I think the what they did is they were trying to reverse engineer it, and they only had so much of it. They ended up going to when they ended up presenting themselves, when Dee and Kelly ended up presenting themselves before Rudolph in Prague. uh Dee, well, Kelly, claimed to be this great magician. They're alchemist, and was showing these transmutations.
We've
And
seen the painting, yeah,
yeah,
with Queen
but
Elizabeth.
then Rudolph wanted him to make a bunch, basically enslaved him, and said, "Okay, well, make me a bunch more." And either he couldn't or he wouldn't, because he only had so much, and he couldn't produce what Rudolph wanted, and so he just remained in prison. And Dee tried to get Queen Elizabeth to intercede on his behalf, but ultimately, uh, Kelly ended up trying to escape from prison. He jumps from a high tower, and ended up dying, as a result of it. So that was kind of the demise of Kelly ultimately. So
And what's amazing is you can still tour Alchemy Alley. You can tour Kelly's apartment they have set up now. And then you can also tour in I believe, the Jewish quarter. There was like an earthquake or something which opened up the ground, and they found a hidden alchemical lab of industry that had been hidden for centuries, almost frozen in time, and people can take a tour of that as well.
yeah, it's really there's yeah, I mean it's a great, even to this day. There's plenty to see there. There is a book that it's attributed to Dee. It's never been proved to actually be Dee, but it's called the Book of Rosicrucian Secrets. And it's hang on. Yeah,
And
it's the Rosicrucian Secrets. Their excellent method of making medicines of metals, and also their laws and mysteries.
wow,
And it's a hard book to get, actually.
it's got the flood image, English, very
Yeah,
English.
but it is really, in my opinion, it's a fantastic alchemical book. really, really good. The only problem with calling it uh, associated with, I mean, there's a lot of things in it that suggests it's John Dee. The original manuscript said it was John Dee, but some people believe that his name was added onto it as a later addition.
Which happened a lot.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's hard to know if it's really John Dee or if it's uh, his name was later put on it, or maybe it came out of John Dee's library. You know, it's a collection of things, but it's very clear that there was pretty serious alchemical knowledge being passed down, and I have every reason to believe it could have been the notes of Dee and Kelly as they were trying to reverse engineer this white and red substance that they found at Glastonbury at St. Dunstan's. So
Yeah, there is a. I did have access years ago in Amsterdam to John Dee's diary. They say it's his original because he would put a fake one out because
yeah,
he knew people was always spying on him and stuff like that. And in there, he's talking about when I cracked it open, it was like one of those moments. Him and Dee are searching through Prague for Moldavite
yeah.
because they're dropping it in the Red Lion, the hydrochloric acid, to get precious metals out because King Rudolph is coming for their heads.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense.
So they're out there looking for this stuff. So 1615, we have the Confessio that comes out, which elaborates more on their philosophy, critiques contemporary society's moral and intellectual decline. 1616, Shakespeare, they decide,
Yeah,
closes the door. Shakespeare passes away. Very interesting that happens during that time. 1617, the Chemical Wedding comes out,
yeah.
introduces alchemical symbolism, exploring themes of spiritual transformation. I,
Well,
you know, I
we should say too that the Confessio,
okay,
it one of the things. Not only does it talk about Rosicrucian interests in alchemy, but it also condemns the Roman Church at the time, and it condemns some of the Caliph systems within Islam at the time,
wow,
saying that they are alluding to the idea that they're passing on a tradition, but these kind of external religious forms of it have become corrupted, and so that's worthy to point out, and it and
that's a Templar connection.
completely, yeah, completely. And then there's also uh, at the same time, they're alluding to that there's an alchemical tradition within the Christian tradition, and that it also says that there's been a number of people have looked at these texts, like I think of Paul Foster Case, for example, in his True and Invisible Rosicrucian Order book, or I think that's the name of it. But it's but they look at there's all kinds of gematria ideas and kabbalistic ideas that are in these manifestos, even while they're alluding to also alchemical and Gnostic and Hermetic doctrine. So just we're putting that out there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, right there. There's the Templar connection again. They would have only been able to get that information and been able to point the finger at that point of understanding.
Yeah.
So 1617, the Chemical Wedding. I've read that, and there was somebody who wrote a book. I don't know how many years ago, and they made a statement. And it kind of blew my mind a little bit that Andrea may have wrote this when he was 15 because he was surrounded by all these people, and that
Yeah.
possibly it was a puzzle book because puzzle books were really popular back
Yeah.
then, almost like video games are now. I thought that was a pretty interesting take on the Chemical Wedding.
I think it's right. Well, you have to remember Andrea's mother as well was the town alchemist in the town of Calf is like the next town over from Tübingen. And Tübingen is where the stift is, where, which is kind of like the religious school, where Johann Valentin Andrea's father and grandfather were both very involved in, as I understand it, and again, and then literally Andrea was being raised by an alchemist, his mother. She was known as the town healer and alchemist and Kolf, and and this whole region, the area of Tübingen, it's all in the Württemberg Black Forest region, but you have Tübingen, you have Kolf, you have Bad Tainach. All these regions are just filled with Rosicrucian mysteries, and the foundation of stuff. And it should not be surprising too, by the way, that much later, people like Hermann Hesse, that's where they grew up as well, and came out and started writing their spiritual philosophies and fiction, like Glass-Bead Game and
Wow.
Journey to the East in particular, so even though that's a little bit later. So
I find it interesting in that area, like in Kessel, and then just to the right, there is Kreuz, Germany.
yeah,
And I often wonder if that was the place that they wanted to make maybe their New Jerusalem, Rose Kreuz,
yeah, right. Babenhausen, there's an area called Babenhausen, which was originally based on Johann Valentin Andreas Christianopolis. That's where he was trying to set it up. Was at Babenhausen,
Okay.
right there. So
it's amazing.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention real quick something I noticed with the Fama. Brother RC goes to the east, and he let me see if I can find this just really quick here. He translates the sages of Damcar's mathematical universe into Latin. And I think it's just funny, in 1614, that same year, Andrea publishes Compendium Mathematicum.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right.
So I feel like he's implanting himself with these other guys in this myth. Like, I'm here too, guys.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
That is awesome. Okay, so let's go to he produces a few more books. The Fifth State of Nothingness, The Tower of Babel. We go to 1619. Republic of Christianopolis comes out. 1619, we've got the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Ferdinand II goes on a Rosicrucian purge because it's growing. They got an audience now, and Frederick V, Elector Palatine, and his wife Elizabeth Stuart were crowned as King and Queen of Bohemia. This is where they were meeting now with the initiates from multiple countries. And you can tour that secret lab today. It's amazing to think who might have been in there, like you said, trying to re-engineer a lot of this stuff. We had the Battle of White Mountain in 1620. That's where we get, Rene Descartes is just a kid marching up there. I think he gets access to some of these texts. Any undocumented info you have on that period of history? Wow.
Well, I'll tell you my favorite story about Descartes was, at one point in time, he got pulled before the Inquisition, and they said to him, "We know you're a Rosicrucian. Admit it." And his response was, "Well, according to the Rosicrucian manifestos, they're invisible, and you can clearly see me. Therefore, I must not be a Rosicrucian."
That's so awesome.
So they let him go. And, so have a Monty Python skit.
he must have had a photographic memory, because it was actually, who did the really good work on that? He did the movie, the alchemical movie.
Yeah, I know you're talking about him.
But he did. Let's get back here. So yeah, Rene Descartes. Again, like you, I see him as a kid. He's marching up. He gets access to these texts. He's probably got a photographic memory, and it's almost like the entire thing is digested into him.
Right.
It's a miracle.
Yeah. Well, at the same time too, you have people like Robert Flood.
Yes, Michael Meyer.
But Robert Flood in particular, he writes an apology for the Rosicrucians. He actually, it was called an apology, but it was more like a defense. He was writing in defense of the Rosicrucian, and some have said he was doing that. That was his project to get recognized so that he would be invited into the Rosicrucians. Others say, he was already heavily involved in all this Rosicrucian stuff, and he was just trying to get it out on behalf of the order. So, which is more likely, or what
Yeah.
would this underground assembly? And then Michael Meyer, same way. But Michael Meyer, the difference was Michael Meyer was working under King Rudolph, so and he was in King Rudolph's favor, unlike what had happened
I
to
did not know
Kelly.
that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So
What a connection. I didn't know that.
yeah.
Wow. 1620s to the 40s, the purge fails. Spread of Rosicrucian thought explodes.
Yep.
1620, the works of Rosicrucian authors are circulated widely, attracting interest from scholars and occultists across Europe. 1622, posters appear in Paris, allowing them to know that this order exists. And then, like you said, 1623, we have Robert Flood publishes Apologia Pro Rosicrucianist, which you were just describing, defending the movement against skeptics, further integrating Hermetic and Kabbalistic ideas.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and astrological to a degree. I mean, there was, I love Robert Flood. He's one of my favorites. But he did kind of get into it with some of the astronomers at the time, because he argued astrologically that the sun was that the Earth was the center of the solar system astrologically, but astronomically, the sun was the center of the solar system, right in line with Giordano Bruno, who was burnt at the stake for such ideas. But in all cases, they were bringing in Hermetic knowledge, and trying to combine it with Kabbalistic understanding, with alchemical understanding, with Gnostic understanding, and they're just trying to bring all these ideas together.
It's amazing. We could start, I think around 1623 with Flood now emerging and Michael Meyer. We could possibly start talking about the influence of Rosicrucianism now going into the Freemason guilds, the Masonry guilds and stuff like that. We've got, just looking here real quick, 1638, Henry Adamson in Scotland.
Yep.
Writes, he's a poet. This is 1638. For what we do presage is not engross. For we brethren of the Rosy Cross, we have the Mason word and second sight. Things for to come we can foretell all right. And that's in 1638. Wow.
Yeah, that's right. But it's not too surprising, because we have in Scotland, we have the Royal Order of Scotland, was developed already by this point, which had its Rosicrucian Knight of Kilwinning as one of the titles. And we also have the Scots. There's certain Scottish families that had been passing down these Templar traditions, and it just made sense for them to be. It made total sense for them to be trying to connect with the Rosicrucian thought in southern France. There's close relation between Scots and the French, and then of course right next door is Tübingen, where all the Rosicrucian mysteries are taking place there, which is also connected with England at the time. So it's like here these four kind of, I don't know, centers, if you will, of these thoughts,
So,
underground thoughts.
so, so now England needs a playwright. So, hey, Ben
Right,
Jonson, what's
right.
up? He's like, okay, I'm in. And now we need a philosopher. They're like, Thomas Vaughan, are you ready?
Yeah, that's right. Thomas Vaughan, Francis Bacon had been
Yeah.
involved in all that.
And then the Rosicrucian themes in their work just explode.
Right,
It's
exactly.
amazing.
And
And
and at
mhm,
the same time, you have Sir Isaac Newton
yes,
starting to do alchemical knowledge. He's transcribing the chemical wedding of, or the
Emerald.
the Emerald Tablet, but he also has copies of the Fama and the Fama, the Confessio,
Wow.
and the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz in his
Wow.
library. He's looking at the works of Eugenus Philalethes, who is also directly tied into all this. In fact, I believe Eugenus Philalethes, he took um, Francis Bacon's book, The New Atlantis, and everywhere where it talks about the College of Solomon, he did a translation or a publication of Bacon's New Atlantis, but everywhere that Bacon had put the College of Solomon, he replaced the word with Rosicrucian.
Wow.
It was so completely connected at that time. So
He
well,
had such style.
yeah, yeah,
That's so awesome.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so Queen Elizabeth the First obviously makes this. She fosters this and creates a fertile environment for it.
Right.
That's amazing. Let's see here. Now, I think Andrea may get a little jealous here of what's going on. He and you tell me if I'm wrong. He comes out with Christian mythology. He presents a satirical scene where explorers discover a sarcophagus with an inscription that condemns the corruption and duplicity of the world. You know,
Mhm.
he kind of flips Rosicrucianism on its head in a sense.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know you have any insight on that writing.
Well, there was, I think at this point, there were all these new groups starting to call themselves Rosicrucian. And
It's almost like a
I don't
Paul
think,
letter.
yeah, it's like, I don't think he was setting out to create a new order per se. He was just trying to perpetuate the mysteries that the Templars had brought in and were being preserved underground. But now there's all these new groups forming,
Yeah,
calling themselves Rosicrucian, and he's like, well, this was not my
exactly.
intention, or originally, so
He dropped a
and
dropped a pebble in a pond, and it's still going today.
yeah, that's right, and I think there was also a lot of, the 30 years war had
Oh, great point.
that caused so much chaos and destruction, and it's still, obvious, thank God that that's not going ravaging today, but it was really a huge deal. I mean, it got to the point even where when the Protestant armies of Frederick, the Duke of Württemberg, took over certain Catholic territories, and including the cathedral, what he did was to ensure that the Catholics could no longer serve mass within that cathedral again. He had himself and a bunch of his militia Cruciferia Evangelica brothers who had been fighting the 30-year war, and their families, they all got buried in the sanctuary of the church to ensure that the Catholics couldn't come in and serve mass there anymore, because they couldn't walk on, they weren't
That's
allowed to
right.
walk on the graves of people. So
It's
it
always the long game.
is a long game, and people were tired by the end of that. I mean, that was it's just that was a lifetime of fighting, and I think people were kind of done with it.
So about 1650, we have Elias Ashmole, English scholar and
Yeah,
astrologer, who seeks to join this brotherhood,
right.
this secret brotherhood that supposedly exists. Uh, some of the writings I've
he and as well as others like Des Gallier and others, they set up a new they helped to set up the Royal Society of Britain, and which really became its utility was to try to prove these things in these Rosicrucian texts, alchemical texts, the works of Francis Bacon in his New Atlantis, where he outlines, the possibility for all of these technologies and cures and everything else. They're like, okay, we need to form a society to implement these things. And so in a sense, the Royal Society became like a Rosicrucian extension, because it certainly was the extension of these Rosicrucian ideas.
The manifestation of their dream, possibly.
Right.
And you're right there, man. That was my next note here was after Elias Ashmole and Sir Robert Murray, who were both members and also members of the Masonic Order,
right.
So they're possibly the ones bringing this stuff in early on as well. As you said, the Royal Society was established on November 28th, 1660. It was founded by a group of, I would say, initiates or influential scientists, including Christopher Wren, Robert Boyle, John Wilkins, and others, with the approval of King Charles II. Incredible. Right. Incredible. Right. I think Andre would have been really happy with that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and let's not forget, Robert Morey and Elias Ashmole, two of the founders of the Royal Society. They were also the modern Freemasonry looks at them as having the two earliest diary entries of being initiated into something that was known as Freemasonry, at that time.
That's incredible. Yeah. That's amazing. Let's see here. 1668, we have Comenius dedicating his VR Lucas to the Illuminati, but he meant the founders of the Royal Society. Totally different group, right? He knew them as the Rosicrucian fraternity.
Right.
Many others jump on the Rosicrucian bandwagon and start writing their own scientific myths. It becomes a fad. It's amazing in that time period how many people are now producing dramatic, romantic, all types of text based on the Rosicrucian Enlightenment.
It's worth pointing out, too, that as far as Masonic and Rosicrucian and Templar connections, they're all kind of like mixed together at this point. From the time that the Neometria was published by 1598, it just so happens at the same time that the Shaw statutes were published in Scotland, 1598, 1599, and both of them had, alchemical ideas in them. And even though the Shaw statutes was, was supposedly for Masons in Scotland, related to Masons in Scotland, it's interesting that it was published the same year as the Neometria in Germany, and both had these alchemical ideas in them. So that, there seems to be, while it wasn't like one organization with a head and the way we look at organizations today, it's almost like it was a loose confederacy of these pockets of survival from the Templar knowledge and influence that had survived in various ways, and now we're all trying to kind of reformulate and reconnect with each other and do the same great work. And the fruits of this started to come out in the 1600s, like we're talking about now, in early 1700s.
That's a quote. That is a quote from Timothy Hogan right there. A loose confederacy. You're so right of progressive and reform, right? Oh, man, that is so good.
Yeah.
That is so good. We'll jump to 1785. We got the 1700s. This stuff, like you said, is going out. We've got the secret symbols of the Rosicrucians that come out, 1785, 88, JDU, Eckhart, 3 volumes. I think we found there's probably a manuscript from the 1700s that it was copied from.
The
I've heard a
Doma,
little bit about that. Okay, so
the Doma manuscripts that
okay, I couldn't find anything on that. If you could share a
yeah.
little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's a manuscript. It's called the Doma manuscript, but it's basically like 2/3 of what became secret symbols of the Rosicrucians, and then there were other manuscripts that were added on, which then became the ultimate secret symbols of the Rosicrucians. Um, but it's alchemical diagrams uh, that are um, very coded and writings as well, and but they are said to be from as early back as the 1500s and the 1400s. So yeah,
That's amazing. 1788, we have the Teachings of the Rosicrucians, a simple ABC booklet by a brother of the fraternity. That might have been the first ones I got my hands on when I was about 20.
yeah,
And oh, I fell in love immediately. Wow.
yeah.
It was just what it was amazing. Do you remember the first time you picked up any type of or even heard the word Rosicrucian? I mean, it just like rang a bell in me the first time I ever
Yeah.
even
I
came
was,
in contact with it.
I was 17 at the time. And I think I first came across the idea. I was studying the works of Rudolph Steiner,
Yeah.
and he mentioned it, and that was my first exposure. But then by 17, I I just dived right in, and by personally for me by 18, I joined the ancient mystical order Rosicrucians Amorc at the time
Yep.
because I wanted to become a Freemason, and you couldn't become a Freemason until you were 21 back then. But I could become a Rosicrucian, so that's
Yep.
where I first went.
That is so cool.
Yeah,
So now we hit the 19th century, and now we have all these groups that are taking it serious. We have, um, it's linked to Rosicrucianism is linked to alchemy and Christian pietism.
yep.
Um, it spawns actual orders claiming derivation from the original non-existent Rosicrucian fraternity. And these movements were generally pursued within the context of continental and American Freemasonry. And a group I've shared with you, and it's my dream, someday for me and you to go visit the Harmony Society in Pennsylvania, because
Yeah,
this is a group that took this information, brought it to America, and it's still preserved.
yeah.
You had a man named George Rapp and Stuart Gard, very influenced by Bohm. Was 700 people. They left. My relative was Solomon Wolf. They dug under his house in Indiana and found an alchemical lab or a chemistry lab.
Wow.
But it was Christian communism. It wasn't, but it was like communism in the belief of God. It wasn't atheist, and they started the steel business and all kinds of stuff in Pennsylvania. If anybody wants to Google any of that information, they can look into it to see where this stuff kind of lands. And again,
Well,
I'd
there
love to
was,
visit it with you because there's so many Easter eggs.
yeah,
Where the main house is, the bottom room, we noticed the walls are like 5 feet wide. That's where they kept all their stuff. And in the back, they have another building. And I'm looking at the roof. We found a fume hood. There's mercury droppings in the floor. And then I got into the roof where there's hidden chimneys.
I'll believe it.
And
Well, that right near there is all the Euphrates cloisters where Johannes Kelpius
mhm.
was also doing his alchemical and meditational ideas, and that whole region, they had the first printing press.
Yes.
This is where Benjamin Franklin actually went to when he needed copies of the Declaration of Independence distributed, translated into different languages like German, and distributed. This is where he went to have that done, and they're the ones who printed it and got it out there. So
That's incredible.
yeah,
Yeah, well, they used to have a perimeter of the land, and they had three towns. The first one they sold, then they went to Indiana. They built that town. They sold it. The buildings there, the architecture is wild. It looks like beehives. And then their final town where they rested, they had an alchemical garden, and they had a perimeter around it of guards. And even when presidents would come visit, they had to go through this perimeter to get into these people. It was pretty amazing. The thing
Wow.
is that they were celibate. I think they were all being affected by mercury poisoning, to be honest with you. They were celibate. I think they might have had a couple of kids that came out that were a little, um, I don't know.
Bookworms.
Yeah. And it really
Deformities.
came down to two, and then the Commonwealth took it over and preserved it. So there's priceless stuff there. So I hope someday you and I can go there, and I can show you around. So as we go forward, 1858, we have a fraternity established in San Francisco. We have the SRIA, Robert Wentworth Little.
Yep.
We've got Max Heindel publishes the Rosicrucian Mysteries in 1888. 1907, he starts a fellowship in California. 1909, we have one in Seattle. 1915, Amar.
Back up a little bit.
Okay.
Because in France at the time, we're going back into the late 1800s. This is where
Yes.
the Salon de la Rose-Croix was established
Okay.
in Paris, which was really, it was coming out of in Toulouse, this area of Source de Ciliel in Toulouse in southern France. They have these underground Rosicrucian groups that actually came from the original Templar survival in that region.
Wow.
And they still have, to this day, they still have alchemical labs in Albigensian caves from southern France, that one of them was right under Bernard Fabre Palaprat's house, who was the Grand Master of the Templar Order, who repopularized the Templar Order in 1804. But in this region, you have by 18, by the mid to late 1800s, this is where you have Joseph Paladin came out of which was an underground Templar lodge, Rosicrucian lodge, known as the Rosicrucian Lodge of the Temple and the Grail is the name of it.
Wow.
And Joseph Paladin is doing this. He writes his book endorsing the arts. They create the Salon de la Rose-Croix in Paris, and out of this came the greatest artists that we know today, like people like Monet and Degas, Toulouse-Lautrec, who was living there in Toulouse. You have they all started showing their art at the Salon de la Rose-Croix, and that's how they got their start and became the luminaries that they were in Paris, from an artistic standpoint. It was all because Joseph Paladin, who was known as Tsar Paladin, he did that. And then out of Tsar Paladin came a man by the name of Tsar Hieronymus. His real name was Emile Dantin, but Tsar Hieronymus was preserving the Rosicrucian mysteries there in France, the Rosicrucians / Templar, because they still, in France, they still saw them as one and the same, just like they did.
Incredible.
And Tsar Hieronymus then, or Emile Dantin, he went on to initiate H. Spencer Lewis, who started Amorc. Then by early 1900s in originally in New York, and then
that's right.
They moved around to a couple different areas, eventually settled in San Jose, California. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I've gotten to visit at one time. It was really cool to walk around and just sitting there in the little garden, and there's that little thing that says "Know thyself."
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
We've got a few other groups. You've already mentioned Amark with H. Spencer Lewis. Them moving around. The Netherlands has the Lectorum Rosicrucianum, and the Rose Quad d'Or. I know a little bit about those guys. So we have that happening in the Netherlands. Let's see here. We have in the 20th century the Masonic Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, right? And we have the OTO. And
Yeah.
so we just see that ripple effect just going and going. Now it goes through Rudolph Steiner. Now we're in the 60s, 70s. I'll let you go ahead and fill us in the 60s and the 70s and the more modern groups and any thoughts on what they're doing today.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of different groups, including Builders of the Diadem, Fraternity of Hidden Light. They all have an inner group, an inner order, which is Rosicrucian based. There are other groups like the OTO. I mean, the OTO is kind of a weird one. It started out as this European Templar quasi Masonic Rosicrucian order. Templar was under Theodore Royce. When Theodore Royce died, he didn't appoint a successor, and so Aleister Crowley, who was a member, tried to kind of take over and become the head. No one
Wow.
recognized him in Europe, so he fled to the United States and then set up shop, his own version of it in the United States. Meanwhile, world wars break out, and most of the leadership of it in Europe dies. So
Yeah.
the only surviving example of it is Crowley's kind of perverted version of
Oh
it,
my God.
and that's what
That's
survived.
the occult nature of things, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, meanwhile,
Ebbs and flows.
back in Europe, there had been
That's so good.
Gerard Uncas, better known as Pappas. He had brought forward the Rosicrucian Order out of existing, the Martinist Order out of existing remnants of a group previous to that known as the Order of the Unknown Philosophers, or the Superior Inconnu, the unknown superiors, which were passing on Rosicrucian mysteries in France, and so he Gerard Uncas he reorganizes these Martinist lineages, standardizes a ritual. He had a publication known as La Initiación that was exploring Rosicrucian, Templar, Masonic, Martinist mysteries, and it was the official public publication of the Martinist Order for 100 years or more, and it was also and it was the official publication of the OTO while it was still in Europe. But it tried to preserve these mysteries that were going on, and still does to this day. So
Yeah, I can speak of without speaking of, in Europe, there is a Rosicrucian group there that are doing ritual. And I've been through a few. In the first one, I'll never forget. And then I went through some Martinist degrees. And that first one, it's the same message. It done exactly the same. And learning from you, going backwards, it was actually probably a Templar one before any of these guys.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. In some of the Martinist stuff was preserved. It's really a form of Christian Sufism. In fact, some of the modes of recognition are identical to what you find within Sufi traditions and the things you say. And it's because they all had those Templar bases, where they, that those mysteries were passed down. So those forms of recognition and everything else, remained. And that's why if you go to, all you have to do is go to a Sufi dervish show, and you'll see that the vestments that the Sufi wear, and those are the same, absolutely the same as what you find within the Martinist traditions. So, with the same forms of recognition being passed down. So, it's all, it's all kind of connected. It all bleeds into each other, and yeah.
It's amazing. You can YouTube a video. It's an interview from the Biblical Hermetic Library there in the Netherlands. Oh God, it's the interview with Dr. Rittman
Yeah.
and another doctor who's a Western Sufi, and their conversation is incredible. Exactly
Yeah.
what you said. I
Yeah.
mean, it's incredible. Oh man, well, all right, Timothy, we are out of time. I cannot thank you so much for being here today. Is there anything else you'd like to say? First and foremost, is there anything that you would like to promote that you're doing?
Oh, well, I cover some of this stuff. I have a television series out right now called Mysteries of the Knights Templar. I get into some of this history, for those who are interested in it, or different aspects of it. Um, so that's on the Gaia network, worth checking out. Also, I'm doing a series of tours right now, both to down into the Yucatan and into Egypt, where we look at these mysteries that were being passed on in these areas, and what the Templars were coming across, and how that ended up entering into what we now call Rosicrucian space. So those are, you can find those through Templar travel tours. If you Google Templar travel tours, there's a Facebook page, and we have some tours coming up, so worth checking out. And aside from that, the only other thing I would say is, that I would caution people. I guess I'd put a word of caution. There's a lot of groups claiming to be Rosicrucian nowadays. They pop up all over the place, and in general, just because they have the word Rosicrucian doesn't necessarily mean they have anything to do with some of the. Yeah, they may have something to do with some of the alchemical, Gnostic, and Kabbalistic and Hermetic mysteries that form the foundation of the Rosicrucian movement, but a lot of them tend to just be ritual magic uh, fraternities, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not necessarily passing on the actual original teachings. There's also some groups that, like within Freemasonry, there's this, in England, the SRIA, in the United States, the Societas Rosicrucianae and Civitas Federatis. It's an invitational only body for Freemasons to participate in Rosicrucian rituals and some Rosicrucian knowledge. And that's supposed to be a research body, but it tends to have turned into more of a supper club for people. So, but it's invitational only. It'd be nice. There are certain pockets of it in the country. In particular, I'd point out the Southern California body is one of the best in the United States. But they do what they can with the members they have in their area to pass on Rosicrucian mysteries. Is greater or lesser depending on where you are. I'm found in the country, but they try. So, but there's a lot of groups out there calling themselves Rosicrucian now, but doesn't mean they're all associated with each other.
Yeah. I would ask you, Timothy, if you would leave us with some words of wisdom, just like the Rosicrucians and Andrea in his time. There was a lot of political distress in his country. Two very a very hard left leaning side and a very hard right leaning side clashing together. Do you, with all your knowledge and wisdom, do you have some words of wisdom for us?
I would just say that the Rosicrucian doctrines always stress balance with everything, whether you're doing a chemical reaction or whether you're you're someone like Carl Jung looking at the alchemical doctrines. And by the way, Carl Jung was friends with Hermann Hesse in that same region where Johann Valentin Andrea had grown up. Literally Hermann Hesse lived across the street from where Johann Andrea lived. Like
Amazing.
same little town. I mean, literally across the street from each other, maybe a couple houses down. But I've been in both houses.
Wow.
But you know, there's an emphasis on balance. Is the point I wanted to make, and we have to get back to that idea. Right now, with political strife in the United States, you have two extremes, and neither extreme is the better way to go. You have to achieve a balanced product out of it. So I would point that out. And the other thing is the Rosicrucian doctrine really believed that, one of the ideas behind the Rose Cross was that the cross represented matter, the rose represented consciousness unfolding out of matter, but the root, the other way to look at it is the vertical arm represented spiritual, the horizontal arm represented material, and that the rose blooms out of that. And that, of course, the connecting point between the spiritual and the physical is consciousness itself. And so this idea that we need to get our consciousness under control, to understand where our thoughts come from, who we really are internally, and this is Carl Jung would agree with this completely, but ultimately that once we understand where consciousness comes from and that we really live in a sea of consciousness, and that there is a natural order to higher consciousness, the more we can attune with that, the more everything else that precipitates out below it falls into harmony. And so we are, and that's where a decision should be being made, politically or otherwise, as is from the top down, not from the bottom up. And so once we do that, everything else falls into harmony. And some traditions, Rosicrucian traditions, Templar traditions, Masonic traditions would say that the way you attune with that is by attuning to your heart, and that where the voice of conscience comes through, that's the higher nature speaking to us. And so by tuning to that, it'll tell us what we need to do in order to create systems that are in harmony with the universal order. And
I cannot.
Greg's, I know you could say a lot on that too. So anything you want to say related to that, you should.
I could not agree more. I echo every single thing that you said. Hair stood up on the back of my neck. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Timothy Hogan, thank you very much for being here. And I am looking forward to another episode sometime.
Yeah, this is great, and I can't wait till this comes out. I think that there's a number of things we talked about here that you just don't find in normal Rosicrucian books on the subject. So, it should be great.
If you enjoyed this episode and find our content valuable, please subscribe to our channel and click the About link on YouTube to discover ways you can support it. This show is dedicated to Art Bell. Thanks for hanging out with us. Until next time.